Please.
She said one word, just one, Seoul. And the moment it left her mouth, Kang Jiho looked at her the way a man looks at something he had convinced. Himself was gone forever and has just been handed back without warning, not with relief, not with triumph, with the specific, heavy attention of someone who understands exactly what they are being given, and exactly what it will cost to carry it well. That was 3 days ago. Now, Jada was standing in the middle of her East London flat, watching 3 children sleep in a pile on the living room floor because the beds had already been stripped. And she was thinking about the fact that she had built this life with her bare hands from the rubble of a lie someone else constructed. She had made it safe. She had made it real. She had made it theirs. And she was about to walk away from it, not because she had been forced, and not because she had run out of options, but because she had looked at a man across a kitchen table and understood, with the clarity that only comes after a very long time carrying something very heavy, that the truth was always going to be a better foundation than the necessary lie she had been living on. Seoul was not a surrender. It was a choice. And what happened next was going to test every single thing she was made of. Welcome back to Mafia Boss Storytime, beautiful people. If you watched part 1, you already know that Jada and Jiho's story is not a simple one. And if you are joining us for the first time, go and watch part 1 first, because what is about to happen will hit differently when you know how far these two have come. Get comfortable. This is the final chapter, and we are giving it everything. Let us be precise about where we are. Jiho flew to London alone. He stood at a school gate in the grey October cold and watched 3 children he had never met reach for their mother with the uncomplicated certainty of people who have always known exactly where safety lives. He crossed a courtyard and said Jada's name the way you say the name of something you thought you had lost forever. He sat across her kitchen table and listened to the full account of what Sua Han had done. The forged letter, Aunt Celestine, the hotel room in Paddington, the 2 pharmacy receipts. The choice Jada had made to believe the letter, not because she was weak, but because she loved him precisely enough to know she could not survive. Hearing him confirm it in real time, he told her, "I looked for you everywhere." 5 words, flat, true, and they broke something open in her that she had been keeping carefully sealed for 4 years. He gave her 2 choices: disappear again, funded completely, unreachable, safe, or come to Seoul as his wife, recognized before the council, protected by a title that no one in the Kang organization could argue with, while he dismantled every threat his father had just put on the table. She said Seoul. He said, "Then we go together." That is where part 1 ended. This is what happened next. And it is not simple, and it is not easy, and it is not the kind of love story where everything resolves cleanly, because 2 people have finally found each other. It is the kind where 2 people who are very good at surviving decide to try something harder than survival. It is the kind worth watching until the very end. Jada did not sleep, not because she was afraid, and not because she had changed her mind. She did not sleep because she was doing what she always did when a major decision had been made, and the emotional weight of it had not yet fully arrived. She was working through the practical architecture of what came next. Quietly, methodically, in the dark, while the 3 most important people in her world breathed in slow, unconscious rhythm in the next room. Seoul meant enrollment. 3 children, 3 different schools to research, 3 sets of needs to account for. Kai needed a teacher who could hold him without crushing him, which was a rarer combination than it had any right to be. Zara needed access to books, volume and variety, and a classroom that did not mistake her quietness for absence. CO needed a space that ran at a human pace, where no one would pathologize his stillness or try to fill it with noise. Seoul meant language. Her Korean was functional and had been. She had made sure of it in those early years when she was still deciding whether she might one day go back. The children had none, which meant an immersion timeline, which meant she needed to know how long before they would feel like themselves again, in a room full of sounds that did not yet mean anything to them. Seoul meant Jiho's father. She sat with that one for longer than the others. Chairman Kang had issued a removal order over a phone call without verifying a single fact. That was not the behavior of a man who would become warm in the presence of grandchildren. That was the behavior of a man who operated from strategy and not from sentiment, which meant the only way to be safe inside his orbit was to be strategically indispensable. The children were that, by bloodline. She was that, by the position Jiho was about to give her, and the very public nature in which he intended to give it. She understood all of this clearly and without illusion, which was the only way she knew how to understand anything that mattered. By the time the sky outside the kitchen window began to shift from black to gray, she had the shape of the next 6 months in her head. Not a plan exactly, a framework. The load-bearing points and the vulnerabilities mapped honestly. She put the kettle on. Jiho appeared in the kitchen doorway 7 minutes later, dressed, which told her he had not slept either. He looked at the kettle. He looked at her. He did not ask how she was doing, which she was grateful for, because she did not have an answer that was both honest and convenient, and she was not in the mood for convenient. "I need to know the school situation in Seoul before we move," she said. "I need a short list. Real information, not what the organization's contacts think I want to hear. Minjun can have it by tomorrow morning. I want to review it myself." Of course. She made 2 cups of tea and set one in front of him and sat down at the table. Outside, East London was beginning its morning. A bus, someone's alarm. The ordinary machinery of a neighborhood waking up, which had been the sound of her life for 4 years, and which she was looking at, now the way you look at something you have decided to leave. With full attention, because you understand it is about to become a memory. "How long do we have?" she said. "That depends on how quickly you want to move. I want the children to finish their term." Jiho nodded. 6 weeks, then. 6 weeks, she agreed. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the window and thought, 6 weeks to say goodbye to the life I built from nothing. 6 weeks to explain to 3 children that the world is larger than they knew and that the man who has their jaw is going to be a daily fact from now on. 6 weeks to become, in every practical sense, someone who lives in Seoul. It was enough time. She had done harder things with less. She told them on a Saturday after breakfast, with the table still carrying the evidence of the meal and the morning light coming through the window, at the angle it did on clear October days in East London, warm and slightly sideways. She did not prepare a speech. Speeches were for people who needed language to manage distance, and Jada had decided some time ago that the only honest way to love her children was at close range. "We are moving to Seoul," she said. "All of us, together. And the man you met on Thursday is coming with us, because he is your father and Seoul is where he lives." Kai put down his fork. He looked at her with Jiho's eyes doing Jiho's thing, which was absorbing information at full speed, while the face remained completely still. Then he said, "Is it far? Very far we will fly. On a plane?" "Yes." Kai considered this. "I have never been on a plane, I know. Will it be scary? A little bit maybe, and then it will not be." Kai picked his fork back up. "Okay," he said, which, from Kai, was the equivalent of a full signed agreement. Zara had not moved. She was doing what she always did with important information, looking at Jada's face rather than listening to the words, because she had understood very early that the face carried the truth that the words were sometimes still working toward. Whatever she found there appeared to satisfy her, because after a moment she looked down at her plate and said quietly, "Will there be a library? I will make sure of it." Zara nodded. That was enough. Seo had been watching Jada since before she spoke. He had known something important was coming the way he always knew, through some atmospheric sensitivity that none of them fully understood, simply by the temperature of the room. He looked at her when she finished, and then he looked at the window. And then he slid off his chair and came and stood next to her and leaned his small weight against her arm. He did not say anything. She put her arm around him and held on. That was how the conversation ended. Not with drama, and not with tears, and not with the lengthy negotiation she had half prepared for. Just 3 children absorbing a large truth in the specific ways that were entirely their own. And a mother sitting at a kitchen table in East London on a Saturday morning, understanding that she had somehow, against significant odds, produced 3 of the most extraordinary human beings she had ever encountered. She called Jiho after they went to play. "They know," she said. "How did they take it?" "Kai wants to know about planes. Zara wants a library." Seo leaned on me a pause. "That sounds right." "It does," she agreed. "Min Jun's school list. I need it by Monday. It will be there Sunday night." She ended the call and went to watch her children play in the small back garden that had been theirs for 4 years, in the gray October light, storing it. The packing happened slowly, which was the correct pace for it. Jada had always packed with the same deliberate care she applied to everything that mattered. Each item required a decision. Does this belong to the life we are leaving or the life we are building? Some items answered immediately. Others required sitting with for a day, which she allowed, because forcing the answer did not make it more accurate. Jiho came back to London on the 3rd weekend to help, which turned out to mean something different from what either of them had anticipated. He was not a man who had spent significant time in domestic spaces performing domestic tasks, which became apparent within the first hour when Kai handed him a roll of packing tape and looked at him with the expectant authority of a small foreman, and Jiho held it for a moment before admitting, with the specific precision of a man who does not pretend, that he was not entirely sure of the correct technique. Kai was delighted. He spent 45 minutes teaching Jiho to pack boxes, with the thoroughness of someone who takes instructions seriously and expects the same in return. Jiho received the lesson without condescension and executed the technique to Kai's evident satisfaction, which produced a nod of approval that Jiho appeared to receive as seriously as he received anything. Zara supervised the packing of her books. This was not a casual operation. She had a system, organized not alphabetically, but by some internal logic that she declined to fully explain, and each book was wrapped and placed with the precision of a museum curator, handling items of significant value. Jiho watched her work for a while, and then, without asking, began handing her books from the shelf at the pace she required, which was the correct pace, and she accepted this without comment, which from Zara was its own form of approval. Seo packed slowly and with great seriousness, considering each item before placing it in the box, as if giving it permission to make the journey. On the last evening of the 2nd weekend, after the children were asleep, Jiho found the small wooden bear on the kitchen counter with a note in Jada's handwriting next to it. "He left it for you. He said you needed it more for the journey." Jiho stood in the kitchen of the East London flat in the quiet and looked at the small bear for a long time. Then he wrapped it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his coat, close, and carried it that way for the rest of the 6 weeks. The flat was stripped back to itself, without the books and the toy cars and the paintings Zara had done in her careful, precise hand, and Seo's collection of wooden figures and the particular accumulated warmth of 4 years of living inside a space. It looked like what it had been before they arrived, a set of rooms, neutral, waiting for the next version of itself. Jada walked through it one last time while Jiho loaded the final bags into the car below, and the children waited on the pavement in the October cold, Kai hopping from foot to foot, Zara holding her school bag with both hands, Seo standing still with his face tipped slightly up at the sky. She stood in the kitchen last, the window where she had drunk her coffee every morning for 4 years. The table where she had sat with translation deadlines and Legos, calls, and 3 children doing homework, and 3 weeks ago, a man who had looked for her everywhere. The small back garden visible through the glass, with the specific gray-green of an English October on it. She had built this from nothing. From a hotel room in Paddington and 2 pharmacy receipts and the specific courage of a woman who understood that survival was not the same as living, but that survival came first, and who had turned the first into the second through sheer refusal to let it be. Otherwise, she was not leaving because she had failed here. She was leaving because she had succeeded so completely that she could afford to choose something larger. She touched the kitchen counter once briefly. Then she picked up her coat and walked out and closed the door behind her and did not look back. Seo took her hand on the pavement without being asked. She held it all the way to the airport. Seoul announced itself through the plane window at 6 in the morning as a field of lights so dense and various that Zara pressed her face to the glass and stayed there for a full minute without speaking, which for Zara was a significant response. Kai had been awake since the descent began. He looked at the city with the focused intensity of a general surveying terrain. "It is very big," he said. "Yes," Jiho said. "Bigger than London, different from London." Kai accepted this revision without argument, which meant he had already decided Seoul was acceptable and was simply establishing the parameters. CO slept through the landing and woke when the wheels touched down and looked out the window at the runway lights, moving past in the dark, and said nothing, but reached for Jada's sleeve and held a small fist of it in his hand for the walk through the terminal. The penthouse was ready. Jiho had not sent staff to manage their arrival, which Jada noticed and noted. He carried bags himself. He showed them rooms without ceremony. He let the children move through the space at their own pace, which was the correct instinct, and he stood back and watched them discover it, with the specific attention of a man learning something he had not known how to want for a long time. Kai found the floor-to-ceiling windows first and stood with his nose against the glass, looking at Seoul spreading away below them in every direction. The Han River caught the early light silver and unhurried. Kai was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough to notice. Then he turned around. "Can I have a car track?" he said. Jiho had anticipated this. "There is one coming," he said. "It will be here by Thursday." Kai evaluated this timeline. "Okay," he said, and went to find his unpacked boxes. Jada stood at the kitchen counter that first morning and made tea the way she made it, which was not the way Jiho made it, and he watched her do it without suggesting adjustments, which she also noted, and noted well. Outside, Seoul continued its enormous electric hum. 3 children ate breakfast at a table that was new to them, in a city that was new to them, in a life that was new to all of them. It was disorienting and real and hers. Both of those things at once. She could work with both. If you are feeling every single thing right now, drop a comment and tell us. Was Seoul the right choice? Is Chairman Kang going to be a problem? We read every comment and we genuinely want to know what you think. And if you have not subscribed to Mafia Boss Storytime yet, right now is the moment. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and join this family. New stories every single week, and you do not want to arrive late to the next one. Korean arrived for the children, the way new languages always arrive. First as noise, then slowly, with the specific patience of children who have no choice but to absorb as meaning. Kai approached it like a problem requiring systematic solution. He found a method within the first week. He pointed at objects and looked at Jiho until Jiho supplied the word, and then Kai repeated it with the focused precision of someone storing ammunition. Within 3 weeks, he had a working vocabulary of everything in the penthouse and most of the street below it, and he used it without embarrassment, which was the most important quality for language acquisition and the one that most adults had lost. Zara acquired it through reading, because Zara acquired everything through reading. Jiho had sourced a set of Korean children's books before they arrived, and Zara went through them with the methodical hunger she applied to every text she encountered, building grammar from the inside out in a way that her school in Seoul would later describe in a conference with Jada as remarkable. Seo listened. He did not speak Korean for the first month, but he listened to everything. To the city outside the window, to the television Ji-ho put on in the evenings, at a volume low enough to be ambient, to the conversations between Jada and Ji-ho at the kitchen table. And then one morning at breakfast he asked Ji-ho, in Korean that was not perfect but was entirely comprehensible, whether there was more rice. Ji-ho looked at him. Seo waited. Ji-ho said in Korean, yes, and got up and served him more rice. Neither of them mentioned it. But Jada saw Ji-ho's face in profile as he turned toward the stove, and she filed it carefully. The expression of a man who had been handed something he did not know how to ask for, and was trying very hard not to show how much it mattered. She let him have it privately. Some things were not for witnessing. The meeting had been formally arranged, because formal arrangement was how Chairman Kang operated. It took place in the sitting room of the family residence, a space designed over decades to communicate the particular message of a man who had built something from its foundation and did not intend to let anyone forget it. Dark wood, controlled light, silence managed like a resource. Jada had prepared the children for a man who was important and who was their grandfather and who was not warm. She had chosen honesty because she always chose honesty, and because Kai in particular would have identified a prepared fiction within minutes and trusted nothing subsequently. Is he scary? Kai had asked. He is serious, Jada said. There is a difference. What is the difference? Scary people want you to be afraid of them. Serious people simply don't have time for things that don't matter. Kai had absorbed this and appeared to find it acceptable. I am also serious, he said. I know, Jada said. That might help. Chairman Kang stood when they entered. He looked at 3 children with the assessing attention of a man who had spent 50 years measuring everything that walked into a room, and he said nothing for a moment that was long enough to be felt. And then Kai walked up to him, straight-backed, direct, with the absolute ease of a child who has never been given a reason to approach anything sideways. He looked up at Chairman Kang's face with careful attention. You look like my dad, he said, but older and more serious. Something happened in the room. Not warmth. Something that was in the same family as warmth but had not been used in a very long time and was operating with some stiffness. Chairman Kang looked at this child with his grandson's jaw and his grandson's complete refusal to manage himself for anyone else's comfort, and he said, I am told you have opinions about car tracks. Kai's eyes narrowed. Ji-ho told you. He did. I have been promised a larger one. I imagine the current one is inadequate. It is, Kai said. The straight sections are too short. Chairman Kang said something quiet to the man standing to his left. The man nodded and left the room. Kai watched this with the focused interest of someone who has just watched a negotiation resolve in his favor and is cataloging the technique for future use. Zara had stood through this entire exchange at a measured distance. She was doing what she always did, reading the room in full before committing to a position. She had watched her grandfather's face during his conversation with Kai, and she had filed something there that satisfied whatever assessment she was running, because she walked forward and stood in front of him and looked at him with the patient, watchful intelligence that Ji-ho had recognized in a photograph on his desk months ago as something that came directly from him. I would like to know about this family, she said. The real history, not the simple version. Chairman Kang looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is not a simple request. I know, Zara said. I will be patient. Seo had not moved from his position near the door. He stood and watched everything with his particular quality of attention, the kind that takes the temperature of a room at the cellular level. He watched his grandfather move through the conversation with Kai, and then with Zara, and then he walked across the room in his unhurried way and stood next to Ji-ho. And he took Ji-ho's hand the way he took things that belonged to him, without ceremony, and stood there holding it for the rest of the meeting. Ji-ho did not look down. He held on. Chairman Kang saw it. He said nothing, but he saw it. He had run an empire at 34, with the precision of a man who had eliminated every variable he could not control, and managed ones he could with a thoroughness that had made him the most feared mind in Seoul. He had walked into rooms that rearranged themselves around his presence. He had made decisions that affected thousands of people without the pause of a single night. He had never learned to read a bedtime story to 3 children who each wanted a different book and were not willing to negotiate on this point. The first attempt ended after 6 pages. Because Kai disputed his interpretation of the main character's motivation, which was a legitimate critique, and also completely derailing to a narrative momentum. The second attempt stalled when Zara pointed out, politely but with the precision of a structural engineer reviewing a bridge, that he had skipped a paragraph. He had. He went back. Seo fell asleep before the end of the first chapter every single night, which Ji-ho eventually understood was not indifference but trust. Seo only fell asleep quickly in rooms where the atmosphere was safe. He had explained this to Ji-ho in the oblique way. Seo explained everything. By once staying awake through an entire story on a night when the adults in the next room had been having a conversation with edges in it, and by falling asleep in 4 minutes the following night when the apartment was calm. Ji-ho had adjusted his schedule to account for this information. Not as a strategy, as a priority. He was learning, in ways that his 34 years of preceding life had not prepared him for, that the most important work he had ever done was the work that produced no visible output, the bedtime stories that ended in arguments about character motivation. The Saturday mornings when Kai required a second opinion on car track configurations and Ji-ho provided it with the same seriousness he applied to board meetings, because it required that seriousness, and Kai would know if it did not. The evenings when Zara showed him something she had written in her journal, with the specific vulnerability of someone sharing a thing they value and wanting to know if it will be received carefully. He received it carefully, every time. Jada watched all of this from the particular vantage point of a woman who had known for 4 years that the 3 most important people in her world deserved a full accounting of where they came from, and who was now watching that accounting arrive in real time, imperfect and genuine, and absolutely what it was supposed to be. She did not soften toward him quickly. That was not her nature, and he did not ask her to. What she did instead was watch. She watched him learn the weight of something that could not be managed from a distance. She watched him sit with discomfort he could not resolve through strategy. She watched him become, slowly and without announcement, a different architecture of the same man. It was not a transformation. He was still Ji-ho. The empire still existed. The cold precision that had made him the most feared man in Seoul had not dissolved in the presence of children and jollof rice and bedtime stories. But it had found its correct proportion, and that was not a small thing. That was, in fact, everything. Ji-ho had wanted to keep it private. Jada had disagreed. Private means it can be questioned later, she said at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning 3 months after their arrival. Formal and public means it cannot. You know this. You are choosing private because you think it will be less complicated. It will be less complicated. Complicated is not the same as wrong. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the specific patience of someone who has already finished this argument internally and is waiting for the other person to catch up. The recognition ceremony for the 3 children as members of the Kang family was held in the organization's formal council space, attended by the full council and several allied families, and conducted with the deliberate public weight that Ji-ho had initially resisted and had ultimately understood was precisely correct. Chairman Kang presided. His face held its usual controlled expression, but he performed the ceremony with a completeness that left no technical space for future challenge, which was what Jada had understood from the beginning, and what had made the public nature non-negotiable. Kai stood through the ceremony with the straight-backed patience of a child, who had decided this was important and was therefore doing it properly. He asked 2 questions afterward, one of them about the car track upgrade that had been promised and not yet delivered, which Jiho addressed before the end of the day. Zara attended with her journal, which she had brought without asking permission, and in which she wrote 3 pages of observations on the way the ceremony was structured, the specific language used, and what she privately noted as the gap between the formal words and the emotional reality of the people saying them. She did not share these observations. She filed them, as she filed everything, for later. Seo wore the small wooden bear in his jacket pocket, which Jada discovered because she felt it when she hugged him before they went in and asked what it was. He showed her. It was a smaller version of the one he had given Jiho, carved with the same sanded smoothness, which he had made himself over the previous 2 weeks, with a carving set that Zara had helped him source, and that had produced, in the interim, a significant quantity of wood shavings on the bedroom floor. "For today," Seo said. "So I have something to hold." Jada had to look away for a moment. She held it together. She was very good at holding things together, and she had decided some time ago that this was not a limitation but a quality. The specific discipline of a woman who understood that some feelings were hers alone and did not require an audience to be real. But she kept one hand in her pocket through the ceremony, wrapped around Seo's small carved bear, and that was enough. 6 months after the first morning in Seoul, the penthouse had a car track that occupied a significant portion of the living room floor, engineered by Kai over 4 separate weekends with Jiho as a largely compliant assistant. It had 2 extended straight sections and 1 loop that had required 3 attempts to stabilize, and it was, by any objective measure, a very good car track. Zara's bookshelf had required structural reinforcement within the first month. The building's facilities manager had expressed polite concern. Jiho had authorized the reinforcement without discussion. The shelf now held 412 books, organized by Zara's private system, and she was working through Seoul's public library catalog with a focus that her school described, with some bewilderment, as exceptional. Seo had found the Han River view on his second day and had established a quiet relationship with it that involved standing at the window in the early mornings and the late evenings and looking at the water with the particular attention he gave to things that he found honest. Jiho had taken him to the river itself on a Saturday 3 months in, just the 2 of them, and they had walked along the bank in the autumn cold without talking very much, which was the correct way to be with Seo, and which Jiho had learned without being told. Jada had 3 translation clients in Seoul now, sourced through her own network without organizational assistance, because she had made clear from the beginning that her work was hers, and she intended to keep it that way. She had also begun teaching a seminar at a university in Mapo on the logistics of cross-cultural communication, which had not been planned, and had come about because someone on the faculty had heard her speak at a conference and made an inquiry, and she had said yes because the work was interesting, and because she was Jada, and she did not turn down interesting work. Jiho attended her first seminar. He sat in the back. She did not acknowledge him during the session because that would have been unprofessional, but she registered his presence with the peripheral awareness she maintained for everything that mattered, and when she looked up at the end, and he was still there, she allowed herself one small private thing, which was the understanding that this man had sat in the back of her seminar at a university in Seoul to watch her work, and that this was, in its way, the most accurate portrait of love she had ever been offered. Not grand gesture, not performance, presence. She carried it home. It was a Tuesday. Early, the city not fully awake yet, the Han River holding the last of the night in its surface before the light came and changed. The kitchen was warm. The apartment was quiet in the specific way. It was quiet before 3 children woke and filled it with the noise of themselves, which was a noise that Jada would not have traded for any silence. She was at the table with a translation and a cup of tea when Jiho came in. He looked at the kettle. He looked at her cup. He made tea without asking whether she wanted more and set it beside the first cup, and sat down across from her and opened his own work. They sat like that for a while. Two people who had found each other through a series of events that no reasonable person would have designed and that had cost both of them considerably, working at a kitchen table in Seoul in the early morning, while 3 children slept down the hall. After a while, Jada looked up from her screen. "Kai lost another tooth last night," she said. Jiho did not look up. "He told me. He is researching the exchange rate." "He already looked it up. Of course he did." She looked at him across the table, at the man who had crouched in a school courtyard in East London and looked at his sons and said, "You are right, we do," who had laid 9 years of evidence on a stone table in Gangnam without raising his voice, who had come back on a Friday afternoon and eaten jollof rice and argued gently about whether the car track loop was structurally sound and put children to bed and held a small wooden bear in both hands, with the care of someone receiving something irreplaceable. She thought about the hotel room in Paddington, the letter, the decision she had made from the conviction that she was alone in it. 4 years of building something real from a foundation that had been false, and how the something real had survived the foundation being corrected, which was perhaps the most honest thing she had ever witnessed about her own resilience. She thought about Celestine, who had carried her guilt at a distance for 4 years, and whom Jada had called 6 weeks after arriving in Seoul, a conversation that had been difficult and honest, and had ended not in resolution but in the specific, tentative opening of a door that had been closed for too long. They were not repaired, but they were speaking, for now that was enough. She thought about Suahan briefly, the way she sometimes did, not with anger and not with forgiveness, but with the flat and honest acknowledgement that a woman who had operated from fear of losing something had ultimately lost everything, and that this was its own kind of consequence, and required no additional commentary. She thought about the small carved bear in Sio's jacket pocket at the recognition ceremony. She thought, "We did this, against everything that was done to stop it, and everything we did not know about each other, and all the years of distance, and the lies we were handed, and the truths we had to find our own way back to. We built this." "Jiho," she said. He looked up. She did not dress it up. She had never been a woman who dressed things up when the plain version was true. "We did all right," she said. He looked at her across the kitchen table, across the ordinary architecture of 2 cups of tea and a translation deadline and a car track in the living room and 3 children breathing down the hall, and the corner of his mouth moved in the way it moved when he was allowing something he had spent 34 years not allowing, feeling something without managing it first. "We did," he said. From down the hall, Kai's voice arrived ahead of Kai, already constructing the opening argument of whatever position he had woken up holding. Zara's quieter voice followed, calm and precise and utterly unwilling to concede anything without evidence. Sio's feet on the floor, unhurried, moving toward the kitchen in his own time. Jiho reached across the table and touched Jada's hand once briefly, and then went back to his work. She went back to hers. Seoul kept going outside the windows, enormous and electric and indifferent, doing what cities do. And inside the kitchen, the tea was warm. The morning was real. The life they had built from the wreckage of a lie and the courage of a choice, and 5 words spoken across a kitchen table in East London was honest and complicated and entirely, completely theirs. That was enough. That was more than enough. Beautiful people, that is the full story of Ada and Kang Jiho. If this one moved you, if you felt every single moment of it, the only thing we ask is this: hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells us to keep bringing you stories exactly like this one. Leave us a comment and tell us what moment hit you hardest. Was it Sio with the wooden bear? Was it Kai negotiating with Chairman Kang? Was it that last kitchen scene? We read every single comment, and we want to hear from you. And if you are not yet part of the Mafia Boss Storytime family, today is the day. Click subscribe, tap that notification bell. We post brand new stories every single week, and you do not want to be the last one to know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching until the very end. We will see you in the next one.